My only Margaret, I hope this letter finds you well. If it finds you at all. Clove Town, I am grieved to say, is in much more dire straits than I could have ever assumed. The correspondence from Sheriff Dillon seemed to grossly understate the morbid severity of the town's small problem. I have so much to tell you, enough to fill up your bookshelves 10 times over. But much like these poor, damned souls, I haven't much time left. I love you, and I will die an unjust man if I don't at least attempt to detail you the reasons for my extended absence. However, I fear that their disclosure may leave you more grieved than being left with the uncertainty of my whereabouts. When I left in April with the horse, I anticipated my returning in no longer than a fortnight. I would have, my darling, given you more information if I myself had been privy to it. From the first leg of my journey, I was struck with the misfortune of losing Dot in the Ohio. The ferryman assured me she was tied down, but of this I am suspect. At the very least, I am suspect of the quality of his knottsmanship. He returned the fee, though, for all the trouble. By the time we got down to the stream, night had already fallen, and the two of us shared a fire and nips of genuine Kentucky bourbon. Gilbert, the ferryman, was a round, bald on top, with lazy eyes. His wife dead in New Jersey of the stomach cancer, and he said his back was already turned on his home before his missus was even in the ground. Nothing left there but ghosts, he said. Them streets are busy, but we ain't nothing there, really. Despite his troubles, Gilbert laughs often, even at his tragedies. Before we slept, he laid back on a rock facing the river and played somber melodies on his mandolin. He hummed as he played, but never spoke the words. I've always said, there's a queerness about a man who speaks often, but never sings. When he finished, I asked him what song he had played. He looked up at the stars above the blue grass and sighed. Can't remember now. In the morning, I wake to find Gilbert already departed. I kept to the road on foot through Louisville, a not wholly unpleasant place. They smoke good tobacco and drink just enough to keep drinking more. Under different circumstances, I would take you there, across the river. We could sit on the shore of the Ohio and burn our throats with buffalo trace. You would look at me with the greenest of eyes. You would tell me you loved me, and this whole damned world would stand still. In Louisville, I was loaned a horse by a certain Mr. James Tomble, a farrier whom I had treated just a few years back. The city ends abruptly with a tree line denser than I have ever seen, but the roads are clear for the most part. By the following night, I had already arrived in Clove Town. Upon my first step into that friendless byway, I knew I was treading on cursed ground. There was a kind of itch in my eyes just looking upon it, upon the black birds that groaned and fluttered from roof to roof. I progressed deeper and found a carcass in the gutter alongside the street. A lamb, left with nothing but bones. Deathly black feathers surrounded the skeleton like smeared ink spilled on the desk of a scribe. Without delay, I found the office of Sheriff Dillon, who had been expecting me. I told him about the trouble on the ferry, and he apologized as if he had been the one to drown old Dot personally. Even as we talked over bourbon, he continued to circle back to apologize for nearly every misfortune that had befallen me on my trip, no matter how small. I tore the hem on my trousers just after leaving Louisville, I told him, and he looked gravely at his feet, much like one does after hearing the loss of a dear friend before the tears come. There's a tailor down the street, he says. A real quality gal, handsome too. Dillon seemed to avoid discussing the matters of my invitation, and I must admit that I grew somewhat impatient with the length of this unrelated story about this person and that thing. He was in the middle of a particularly tenuous monologue on the prospects of a new botanical garden when I finally cut him short. You mailed me about a certain malady spreading in your town, Mr. Dillon. As much as I appreciate the pleasant conversation, I would rather tend to the unpleasantries for the time being, if I can be so frank. The sheriff passes by me toward the window to his right. He stands, staring into the cloudy night for several moments, and he breathes deeply from his belly, then returns to his seat. "It's gonna rain," he whispers. I glance out the pane. It appears so. "Dr. Stanley, we're all dying. All of us." I lace my fingers. "Everyone's dying everywhere, Sheriff. How we are dying is what I am more interested in. Withering, wasting, like a tobacco plant in the hot sun. Consumption. It's rampant and as devastating as it is cruel. It passes from person to person in the communities like Clovetown, faster than you can run away, and when it catches you, it's just a monster. The best you can do is make the victim comfortable, but even that is an impossible task at the later stages. Between the blood-soaked coughs, chest pains, and fever, most physicians won't even bother risking the chance of infection. They are dead men walking. We are talking years of pain and suffering, not months, not weeks, years, sometimes up to 5. It's a long death. The only treatment that's worth the time and effort, once symptoms start, is a lead shot between the eyes. I knew the situation was already outside of my skill to handle. It's like trying to stop a forest fire with nothing but air in your lungs. At best, you won't stop a damn thing. At worst, you'll burn up too. Dylan started listing the body count, but the names eventually clogged his throat. We had been talking for hours into the night at this point. The sheriff was exhausted, and so was I. We ended our meeting abruptly, promising to talk more in the morning. Before I could depart, Dylan gave me a parting word that still rings in my ears. "Meet me here at dawn, and I'll show you where we keep them." I should have ducked out of town at that point. Hindsight is a cruel mistress in that way. As I walked through the darkness to the only inn in town, I thought of you. My trips have taken me from you for months at a time, but the longing I felt toward home in that moment was enough to nearly break me. My heart ached as a deadly premonition of my never returning. I have never made room for the entertainment of mystics or the faithful, and that is my greatest shame. A force beyond was pulling me from that cursed ground, yet it kept me there at the same time. Maybe I, as Dante, was entitled to walk through those hellfires. Through me you shall pass into the city of woe, through me you shall pass into eternal pain, through me among the people lost for aye, justice, the founder of the fabric moved. To rear me was the task of power divine, supremest wisdom, and primeval love. Before me, the great were none, save the eternal, and eternal I shall endure, all hope abandon, ye who enter here. A great fool was Dante for never heeding the signs of Tartarus, and even a greater fool am I for not heeding the songs of ravens. I got to the inn just as the rain began to fall. The sign above the door read, "The Stooge." From the outside, you would assume it was little more than a patchwork lean-to, and once you walk inside, you would confirm your suspicions. 4 tables stand around the lobby, and a large maple bar top stretches from the east wall before curving to connect to the south wall. 2 lamps are the only source of light in the entire lobby. They project stiff shadows that crawl up the boarded walls. Behind the bar, an elderly woman sits on a stool, guarding the drink. "Excuse me, ma'am," I say as I approach, but she doesn't reply. "Ma'am, I believe a room has been prepared for me." Still no reply, her head slumped forward, hair veiling her face. Rain is pelting the fragile glass windows, and they shudder. It sneaks in from somewhere, and steady drips slap against the floor. I'm walking around the bar, and I can feel every draft drape over my neck. "Miss?" I place my hand on her shoulder. She snores loudly before breaching from her slumber. She looks at me with wild, glassy eyes. "Who's there?" It's Sorry, you just scared me, I bleat. Her dead eyes flicks toward me. Who are you? We are closed. My apologies, I got here much later than anticipated. Mr. Dillon requested my services here, seeing as... I try to go on, but her hands jitter up to my chest and to my face. You're young, she whispers. Selling something? Goodwill and good health, I say as her finger traced my eyes. I'm a physician. Mr. Dillon said that Clove Town was in some trouble. She snorts out a laugh from her nose. Trouble? Yes, ma'am. No trouble here. A broken wagon wheel's trouble. Silverfish are trouble. A dry well is trouble. No trouble in Clove Town. Her hands break contact. Some people seem to think differently. A sickness. Doomed, Mr. Stanley. She silently guides me to my room on the second floor. We ascend the staircase on the west wall. The rotten boards moan and warp under our weight, threatening to break. We find the room, and she opens the door for me. With more than a little hesitation, I step inside and turn to thank my host, but she shuts the door. I hear her footfalls grow quiet as she moves down the hall until the sound of the storm overtakes all other noises. I sit on my bed and try to recall if I ever introduced myself to that old crone. I wake the next morning, unsure of when I actually fell asleep. Outside, a raven is perched on my window. It runs its beak through its feathers before pulling itself up and closing its eyes for a nap. A light drizzle quickly coats the bird in countless tiny pearls of water. The inn is filled with a hearty smell of pan-fried meat and warm bread, and below the banister, I see several patrons sitting around the tables. They speak grimly to one another over their breakfast. When I begin to descend the stairs, all of their eyes spin towards me, and their chatter fizzles into nothing. Good morning, gentlemen. I gesture as warmingly as I could muster. Morning, growls one of the men. He pulls out a cigarette and lights it with a match. From behind the bar, a young lady appears, dressed in cotton and sporting a particularly large sun hat. If I may be frank, she seemed to be the queerest sight yet, not only because of the strangeness of her person, but more so by sheer comparison to the other residents. She seemed lively, a word that I cannot ascribe to anything else within the bounds of Clove Town. The woman, whom I later learned was named Florence, picked up the affairs of the inn a couple years prior. The elderly woman I had met the night before, known as Nan, technically owned the establishment, but Florence keeps things in order as best she can and sees Nan as a surrogate mother. She collects a couple plates in her flour-dusted arms and spins towards me. You get here last night, hun? Yes, rather late actually. I believe I spoke with the proprietor. She showed me to my room, I say. You woke up Nan? Dangerous. Luckily, she didn't have her skillet. She'll swing that like nothing else. She smiles from her eyes. Knock you out cold. I return the smile. Spry for her age. She's been 35 for as many birthdays as I can remember. She seems to be moving just fine for her age. I move to the bar, and Florence disappears through the doorway. I can hear the clink of tableware being washed, and she emerges after a couple minutes. You hungry or something? Drink? I wave my hand. No, nothing right now. I'm actually engaged this morning. She places a glass tumbler on the bar and pours a finger. Who's the lucky gal? The glass slides my way. Oh, I chuckle. Not like that. I have an engagement. A meeting with Mr. Dillon to be exact. I'd hate to be engaged with that prick, roars a patron behind me. Always knew he's a queer. One laughs in reply. Florence smiles and sighs. Take a drink anyway. He really is a prick. I finish the shot and exit the establishment with a single, good day, and no one replies. The street is little more than a deep strip of mud. I sink to my ankles with every step, and a thin mist wards the road from drying. The air in Clove Town has a strange saltiness to it. It smells like the coast, like sea foam. It feels good in the lungs, but the smell saturates your clothes almost instantly. Clove Town has that adherent quality to it. You can't touch anything without something sticking with you, and you sticking with it. It's a small town of infinite exchange, even if just glances. I got a lot of those here. It seems to be the township's sole pastime. Their stares linger just for moments too long. They blink just slightly too infrequently. Their eyes are collectively as captivating as they are remorseful, though. Found it strange on my way to the sheriff's department at the lack of signs of illness yet so far. The sheer dampness, the amount of stagnant pools, and the general disregard for personal hygiene should be the perfect breeding ground for disease and parasites of all manner. In my mind, Clove Town grew into an enigmatic space outside of space. The terms of engagement were different on a fundamental level. I arrived at the department and catch the sheriff smoking from a pipe, his beard tucked into his shirt. He stands there stoically as I approach. "Morning, Sheriff," I offer. He swivels his eyes my way and exhales the thick vapor from his lungs. The cloud sits in front of his face, then a stiff breeze carries it away. When it passes, I notice he's holding a bandana. "Gonna want this, Mr. Stanley," he growls. "A handkerchief?" "A blindfold, Mr. Stanley." I feel acid crawling up my throat. I hardly think that's necessary. Believe it or not, I've seen my fair share. I'm a hard man to surprise. The man stares at the bandana and draws again from his pipe. "Mr. Stanley," he offers the cloth again. "The blindfold, please." Sheriff Dillon is not a man who looks like he negotiates much. He passes off the cloth and knocks out the coals from his pipe before reaching in the doorway to retrieve a hunting rifle. He inspects it, jolts the action, and looks at it with an unhealthy amount of fondness. I speak up. "Is that necessary?" He sighs. "You folks aren't like my folks. I asked if you would come to help, and you came on your own. My town, my rules. Any more questions?" I had many, but I don't air them. The sheriff and I move through the town with very limited conversation. Occasionally, he will point the butt of the rifle towards a building and say a single word: "Dead. Dead, 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 dead." "They're dead there too," he coughs as we end the street. "And you haven't called any other physicians? Surely there was someone closer than I. Maybe someone on this side of the Ohio?" "I sent out letters to a lot of people, not just doctors. Psychics, holy men." He lights his pipe again. "Shamans." "And did they respond?" "Some did, but none of them showed up, except for the kid." "A doctor?" "A crow. A boy no older than 12, he says. He showed up with owl feathers in his hair just as people started changing." "You mean dying?" He stops in the middle of a field on the outskirts of town. "We are here." In front of us is a schoolhouse surrounded on all sides about 50 feet away by steep rock faces. The school, a rotten hovel with boarded windows, leaned to one side, its steeple hanging at a lazy angle. The weather vane had fallen off and lodged itself into the peat, where it spun upside down in the morning haze. A starling flutters from the surrounding grass and perches on the vane. "A sick house?" I ask. "More like a prison." He pulls a ring of keys from his belt and walks to the door. The tumblers spin. The door opens and a stench pours out. Sweet, putrid, stinking fluid, like the issuance of an animal intestine, leaked from the school's gaping orifice. The stench was so thick it nearly knocked both of us over. Even the typically stone-faced sheriff coiled his nose into a tight arch. His face smooths. He brings his rifle to his shoulder. "Fucking stinks," he says. "Fucking stinks animals." Something sloshes in the darkness of the schoolhouse, and a ripple of fluid drips over the stoop. Again, a heavy slosh. Unprovoked, Dylan starts firing round after round through the doorway. The slugs burst from the barrel and disappear after an ear-splitting explosion. There is stillness, followed by his figure stumbling into the light. It falls face first into the dirt, heaves one last breath, and dies in naked disgrace. "No fight in that one." I stare, sweating and dumbfounded. "You killed him! You killed that man!" The sheriff bends down to pluck a dandelion. "Killed it." I run to the door where the man fell and flip him over. 3 entry wounds, 2 exit wounds, no pulse, no response to stimuli, emaciated, hairless, coated in a film of excrement. Dead. Something catches my ear, though. Something breaks me from the autopsy. The sound of shuffling in the school. I turn my head and see them. Bones and skin walk in between the dim beams of light that shine through the broken windows. They are surprisingly mobile to various degrees. The lot of them are tied about the chest and tethered to the support beams that hold up the roof. They shuffle and gimp. Some crawl in the filth. Others chew lazily at the restraints. They seem unconcerned by the gunshots, as if in stupor. Their eyes are glassy and fogged like that of a dead fish's. How? The sheriff twists the flower between his digits. How what? How did this happen? Who are these people? "So, we are doomed, Mr. Doctor. This a one stumped you?" He laughs and discards the blossom. "Don't know how it happened, but I still know all their names." He points. "Coal miners, brothers, Ted and Eddie, Dot, Phil, the Carvers, and Coopers. Their boy Clarence, Blancha, Florence, Clifford, Michael, Donnie, Will. That's Blanche's husband, Boris. Otis, Mr. Black, Mrs. Black, the Smith's girl, Lily." "You did all this?" Dylan walked to the doorway with his heel hanging off the frame. "Nah, I helped. Mr. Black helped. Then they died." The mob shifts their gaze as soon as he enters. As one, they lurch towards him. One moves with so much force that his bindings slip from his arms and catch him in the neck. It breaks with a hollow snap. He falls to the ground and doesn't get back up. At that point, the swarm of bodies have pulled their leashes tight. Their feet slip on the sludge, and a couple topple over under their feet of the others. None of them break that predatory focus. They snap at their prey with rotting, gnashing teeth. "Come with a doctor, y'all. Don't seem like he knows shit, though." "Sorry." A scowl paints his face when he turns. "This isn't what I was prepared for. You said consumption." The scowl deepens. "You said consumption. You ain't said much else, though, other than to badger me." "Shoot straight, doctor. You ain't got jack shit on what this is." He lifts an accusing finger to the crowd. A cord snaps and the finger disappears behind rows of teeth. Dylan screams. He fights with his aggressor with spastic punches and flails. He manages to repel the beast with a solid boot to the chest, and he flops onto his belly and scrambles toward me on all fours. His face is pale, his lips curled over his teeth. He's not fast enough, though, and in his adrenaline-fueled daze, he completely forgets his firearm. As soon as he regains footing, the monstrosity leaps into the air and squarely upon the back of this poor man. I'm frozen in terror. Dylan is no more than a yard from me, when a chunk of his neck is chewed off in one solid, tooth-cracking snap. The artery sprays blood into the air like hot spring geyser, and I'm coated in the viscerous ichor. I'd like to say that his suffering was brief, but in great shame, I do not know. Dylan's aggressor seemed so transfixed on its feast that I was able to slip away. I turned back, only once, expecting to see the sheriff's outstretched hand and pleading eyes, but I wasn't afforded that image of my cowardice. He was convulsing in the dirt, his back split open wide enough for the beast to fit his whole head in his chest cavity. A spirit carried my legs faster than I've ever ran before. By the time I had made it back to town, I could little more than crawl. I think to go straight away to my room. The taste that sublimates into a metallic odor is coating my mouth. The buzzing chatter in my brain freezes and drops into my stomach like a plumb bob. Blood. Filthy, rotten blood. It smears further when I try to wipe it from my face. A conniption set in. A fury like I've never known takes over my body. I forget the next hour or so. I was not sure as I had lost my watch. And I wake up on the floor of the former sheriff's office. The room looked as though a bear had rampaged through it. Shattered glass scattered the floor. The walls bore deep gashes. My arms trembled and are tore to bare muscle in some places. I feel no pain, though. I stand, catch my bearings, and move to Florence's dismembered cadaver that is sprawled across the desk in the middle of the room. The sight of her is so striking that I hardly even notice the screams outside. I pick up the pieces of her head and place them on the end table. I cannot save these people, Margot, because we are not sick, we are hungry. I will find you, always, Langston Stanley. There are secrets buried deep in the heart of the Appalachians, secrets that have never seen the light of day. Some that would drive a man insane, some that will and should never be uncovered. I've been hiking through the Appalachians for a long time. Born nearby and had a love of nature, so a natural fit. I made the hike up and down the whole of the mountains several times and developed a respect for them. Rather, a deep reverence. You care for the mountains, and it cares for you. You disrespect the mountains, and it will exact its revenge. I was taught that early. I've seen a lot of things in my years, but this one takes the cake. I'd taken a month off from work and was prepared to hike through the Appalachians from bottom to top. First day started off as normal. Surrounded by the sounds of nature, I was relaxed and taking it slow. There's a calm that comes about you when you escape from the city and into nature. I think that's why I keep coming back. The second day, that calm was broken. As I woke up, I cooked myself some breakfast and was set to head out soon when I noticed the whole forest was quiet. Normally, this never happens. There's always some birds chirping, insects making noise, and the occasional animal that gets curious. Today, there was none of that. Unsettled, I decided to take off anyway and continue my journey. By noon, the quiet had still been following me. However, I noticed there seemed to be something following me. I had no proof, just a gut feeling. As anyone who's been around will tell you, always trust that feeling. That's how I've made it through many of my journeys that I've made. I've come across many animals, but for some reason, it didn't feel like it was a bear or a mountain lion on my tail. Whatever it was, it made sure to stay well out of sight. This continued on until evening time, when I decided to set up camp. The sounds gradually started coming back, but the feeling was still there. I decided that the best thing to do was get a fire going and make sure to keep it up all night. It wouldn't be my first sleepless night in the woods, but I was hardly happy about it. I ate my dinner and brewed up some coffee and settled in with a book. At around 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up. Must have dozed off while reading, I thought. Fire's still going well and good, thankfully. The forest sounds were back, and my unease had settled. I took some more of the coffee that I had left on and sat back, trying to think of what could have been following me earlier. It didn't take long before I realized there was a pair of eyes watching me from out of the dark. Nothing is more terrifying than knowing you're being watched by something out in the dark in the middle of nowhere. The mountains always keep you at their mercy. Sometimes they're kind, sometimes less so. I'd like to think this is one of those times where I was lucky, that some sort of karma came back to me and saved me. I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. However, those eyes started to come out of the woods, forming a mountain lion behind them. A gunshot rang out through the night and caught it right between the eyes. I turned around and looked behind me. There stood a man, taller than anyone I'd seen before. Bigger, too. He looked rough, beard unkempt and long, hair that hit his shoulders that looked equally as rough, and with a voice that sounded of the deep, rumbling earth itself. He spoke to me. "Lucky you." I'm sorry?" I stammered, not quite hearing him at first. "Lucky you. The mountain. She saved you," he said, moving toward his kill. "What do you mean? You were the one that saved me. Thank you, by the way. Would you care for some coffee?" I managed to get out, my feeling of unease back, my anxiety skyrocketing as everything in me told me I needed to run. He was quiet for a second, looking surprised by the offer. "Sure, it ain't often I see good folk up here. Mostly just bad that need punishing," he said with a thick accent. I poured him a cup, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "Sorry, I don't have any cream or sugar with me." He chuckled, a deep laugh that seemed to come from the very ground beneath us. "Black's fine. That's how I like it anyway. I see that you know to take care of her," he said, pointing to my bag full of trash. I handed him a mug of coffee and took a deep gulp of my own before replying, "Of course, don't soil the beauty of the mountain. It just wouldn't be right to leave all this laying around for the animals to get into." "I see why she told me to come to you. I was watching you earlier to make sure I didn't need to take care of you." I stopped. "You were following me? When?" I barely got out, all too aware of the rifle over his shoulder. "Of course, most of the day. Don't get many folk around this part, so I had to make sure. It's my job, my home. I gotta take care of the mountains. She's kind to me when I'm kind to her, just like how she sent me here to save you. She don't like me to see the good ones die on her," he said with all seriousness. "What do you mean by she? I don't understand." I trailed off as he stared at me, eyes an unnatural shade of yellow, almost akin to cat eyes, seeming to stare deep into my soul, seeing me for who I was and not who I appeared to be. "The mountain, or the spirit of the mountain, me and my kin are her protectors. I can see you're not quite following, but that's alright. Just know that you're lucky it's me that found you. Some of my kin don't take kindly to any strangers, much less humans in their neck of the woods. I'm alright with you if you're alright with the mountain." The silence droned on between us, and I didn't know what to say, not fully understanding what was going on. "Thanks for the kindness, stranger, but she needs me again. It ain't gonna be pretty." He got up, and he moved out of the camp. And as he moved beyond the firelight, he seemed to just disappear. I thought I caught a glimpse of a large animal where he had been, but surely I was just tired. After the adrenaline wore off and exhaustion set in, I felt myself drifting off. I woke in the morning, not quite believing what had happened last night. I would have believed it to be a dream, but the cup was still there, and so was the mountain lion. Not wanting to come back down from the journey, I decided to press onward. Everything seemed to return to normal. That was until about lunchtime. I started to smell something wrong. I made my way forward, recognizing the smell of blood. I made my way into what seemed like a mess of a camp. There were 3 tents, but not a single sign of anyone nearby. Trash was thrown everywhere, and the stench of blood and death was heavy. I took it upon myself and made my way to the nearest town, about half a day away, to report it. But I knew they were gone, whoever they were. At that moment, it all became so real. The mountain chose to spare me, but she was not kind to those who disrespected her. I still go back, but with more reverence. And now, fear. The basic trait of human nature is curiosity. It's what defines us as a species. No matter what part of our beautiful planet we live in, we always look to the skies and wonder, admiring the vastness of the cosmos, and asking about our place in this magnificent world. Could we really be alone in the emptiness of space? A small spark of life that went against the natural order of entropy? Or are we just part of a greater scheme, just a tiny cogwheel in a world far more advanced than us? We asked ourselves these questions, but we never sat back and thought if we were prepared to receive real answers. Alas, our romantic view of the universe could be forgotten under the terror of the horrific truth. I guess H.P. Lovecraft was correct from the start. In his cult classics, he wrote about gods, so powerful and terrible in nature that they dreamed the world into existence and created humanity as a toy to pass their time through the eons. But we were lucky. We were so small, so useless to them, so insignificant that they didn't even care to look down to us puny mortals. Should they ever choose to, though, humankind would be reduced to ash in the blink of an eye. Sometimes I think that the man had true visions of reality outside of our blissful ignorance and wasn't writing fiction, but history. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm an astrophysicist. I work for the European Space Agency, or ESA for short. I would like not to reveal my name for the sake of remaining anonymous, but I'm pretty sure I will be discovered sooner or later after posting this. Since my university days, I wanted to be a little different, so when everyone chose their thesis fascinated by galaxies and nebulas, I decided to work on more subtle things. I specialized on voids. These are dark places of the world with very small number of galaxies inside them. I figured out that it would be the future of research, since I would have less competition. Most people want to study stars and quasars either way, so I had an open field and lots of opportunities to discover. After graduating, I started to study the Boots supervoid, and to this day, I'm still working on that project. It's a huge void with a diameter of 330 million years long. Voids occur naturally throughout space, but it is really rare to see an emptiness so big hosting only around 60 galaxies, when statistically there would be at least 2,000 of them, hence the name supervoid. I remember the day I started to realize the truth. It was my first day back to work after a well-earned 1-month summer vacation. Me and my team had been observing a galaxy inside the supervoid. The galaxy had a strange tendency of dimming and lighting back up every few weeks. But every time when it got brighter, it lost some of its luminosity, never fully returning to its former glory again. That night, the galaxy was nowhere to be found. My colleagues, hadn't noticed anything. We had agreed that they would go on with their personal projects and that we'd look the measurements over that were taken while I was on my leave, together, on the day of my return. But of course, the measurements read nothing. It was like the galaxy wasn't there in the first place. Like it just dimmed out of existence. But whole galaxies do not disappear like that. We composed a relatively short paper, stating our findings, and we started working on a theory, discussing what could be behind this strange situation. In a few days, I was contacted by the big dogs themselves. It was NASA. A trip was scheduled in minutes, and in 2 days' time, I was in a briefing room where I was about to learn that all my theories about the Boots supervoid were wrong. Before anything else, I had to sign a contract swearing my complete secrecy about the issue. I was burning with curiosity, so I obliged. You probably have heard about the theoretical civilization types, the scientist asked me. Of course I had. The Kardashev scale is a ranking system of intelligent beings, based on what amount of power they have command over. The maximum is thought to be type 3, with beings being able to control the full energy potential of the galaxy they inhabit. Humans were ranked a lowish 0.7, not even being able to take advantage of our planet's output. I nodded at the scientist and he continued. Now imagine a civilization so evolved that it has transcended even that extraordinary limit. A species so advanced that it can manipulate and absorb multiple galaxies in their entirety. This is what we are dealing with here. It looks like the Boots void isn't empty, but in fact full of life. The beings living in this area of space are so powerful, they absorb and use anything in their path. This is the sole reason why the Boots supervoid exists and appears to be so vast and empty. I shook my head in disbelief. Such a concept was nearly inconceivable. Only a god could reach such power, because God is the only description I could give to them. And there was more to come to my troubled mind. Have you ever had contact with them? I naively asked. I knew that our audio waves barely left our stellar neighborhood, but I hoped that we may have received and decoded some of their messages. They transmit in thousands of wavelengths, but their language is so advanced that it seems to transcend the limitation of time. They speak to the past, the present, and the future simultaneously. We can only decrypt tiny parts of the pandemonium of signals, but we know that either way, they don't even address beings like us. Their message is a repeating pattern that has been going on for years. It's an SOS. They are asking for allies because they are in a war, and they are losing. A female colleague of his continued. They are searching for civilizations of the same caliber as them to help them. But they seem to completely ignore less advanced beings. To them, we are ants helplessly running underfoot, completely useless in the grand scheme of things. They couldn't care less about whether we live or perish, but they would gladly destroy our solar system and the entire Milky Way if it meant they'd get some more power in their quest to save what they believe worthy. Because even them are fighting something even stronger than them. Wait, I asked, when did you learn all this? And what horrible power could be stronger than those beings? The woman spoke again. We knew all the way back in 2008 when we detected the strongest gamma ray burst ever recorded. We understood it was a quasar-sized target missile of pure energy, which could pierce through an entire galaxy. But it had no effect on its target. After that, they showed me a simulation on the projector in the room. The Milky Way and the entire supercluster of galaxies where it resides seemed to be accelerating extremely fast to a certain region where the superclusters were also heading, seemingly drawn by an unknown force. The region was the target of the gamma ray burst, too. If we are correct, said the scientist who had spoken before, the entities living there can swallow galaxy clusters in a few months, making them the closest thing to rulers of the universe. But it seems this is exactly what they lust for, and the stronger they become, the faster our inescapable doom. Because at this rate, they will be able to have enough power to absorb even a supercluster like it was a milkshake in a glass. But they will not stop until they get what they want, and we are directly on their path to it. I don't know what to do with all this. I feel so helpless. Since then, I've been working with NASA to think of something that would ever help save us. But there is nothing we can do. It's hopeless. If we were to upgrade as a higher type of civilization, we should have done it already. There's no time left for us. We will never become strong enough to protect ourselves from the true forces of the cosmos. We will just hide in our caves like critters, too weak to even look into the eyes of our impending doom with the pride we once had. I do wonder sometimes about why these unimaginably strong beings lust for even more. Then I remember how humans fight over the breadcrumbs of a tiny planet of zero significance, killing and enslaving our brothers in search of energy resources so primitive that they seem laughable. But it seems that everyone desires power, and the more you have of it, the stronger the addiction. I can't even imagine the level of ambition when the prize is the total dominion of the world. I've sworn secrecy, but I have to break the silence. Either way, it feels like it doesn't really matter. With the powers in play, we could be gone in 1,000,000 years, or just 10, and we won't even know when or how it will happen. But humans are curious. They have to know the truth. It is, after all, the only sense of control we have. So, there you have it. We are not alone in the universe. I wish we were. We are not important to this world. In fact, we are so powerless and measly that the monsters that will eventually destroy us won't even hear our screams. So the next time you look up to the skies, pray. Pray that, to the gods of the universe, we are so insignificant that they never fix their eyes upon us. Pray that we will never be important enough to gain their attention. It's our only hope of surviving just a bit more. Has anyone else seen a Wiggle Man? I'm really not one for this ghost and goblin stuff. I just don't know what else to call it. It's the shape of a person, stands on 2 legs and all, but it twitches and vibrates when it moves. Like it's tortured to make any movements, and it's almost as if it's blurry from the shaking. I've only seen it at work when I'm alone and the lights get turned out. I work in a garage, have been since I dropped out of high school in '73. It's harder now that most cars are diagnosed on computers. I have a hard time keeping a job that relies on the digital stuff. I just started out at a new shop that specializes in older vehicles. It feels like old times. Things seemed to be going smoothly for the first few months until they gave me the keys and had me start locking up at the end of the day. That's when this wiggler started moving around. It seems to have an aversion to lights, so when I shut off the lights is when I see it. It shudders or shakes as it walks, like it's getting an electric shock, or almost like it's made from TV static. Fast, twitchy movements. I don't know how else to explain it. I can't see much in the way of details, like skin or clothing or nothing. But I can feel that it wants to hurt me. The damn thing is angry, and I can feel it in the air. So when I shut off the shop lights, I always spring to the office where the lights are still on. I feel like a damn fool. I'm too old to be afraid of the dark. This thing always rattles its way from the back of the shop where it's just a mess of storage. During the day, I've rummaged around back there, thinking I'd find someone had set up some makeshift living space. You've heard the stories, where someone is living in an attic or something, and the owner doesn't know until it's too late. That's what I was expecting, but there was no sign of it. That's why I stopped thinking it was a person. There's a large stain on the ceiling back there too, like a large oil stain from under a truck, but on the ceiling, and some black charcoal looking stuff below it. I don't know how someone could make a stain like that. And if you look at it just right, it almost looks like it has depth. Like a hologram. It must just be some weird lighting or something. I don't know if the stain has anything to do with the Twitcher. It does seem like it's connected though. Last night, when I was closing up, I could feel the hatred in the air before I even went to switch off the lights. Or maybe all this paranormal stuff is just getting to me. Either way, it was like there was a low hum oscillating in my ears and the air felt thicker. Time moved slower. With the lights still on, I went to the back to make sure the air compressor was drained for the night. I felt the urge to run away, to get the fuck out of the shop as soon as I could, without closing it all down. The compressor kicked on as I was walking up to it, startling me a bit. The thing is old and loud as hell. Can't hear anything past the rumbling of the old machine. I'm still about 10 feet away when the lights just shut off. The switch is on the other side of the shop. I'm stopped like a brick wall just got slammed in front of me. The air compressor's motor blaring in my ear, filling my head with its rumblings. The noise is the only thing I can sense while my eyes are adjusting. My boots are lead and tarred to the floor. The damn compressor camouflaging any sounds. Feeling every muscle keeping me on my feet. Feeling every breath that passes from my lungs into the darkness. I feel every heartbeat claw and scratch another hole in my courage. Feeling every stretched second as if it's an hour. And then the lights turn back on, just like that. Pop! A deafening hiss from the old beast of an air compressor as its motor shuts off. I quickly look around and run to shut it off. I finish up the rest of closing duties and start for the lights. I prepare myself the way I always do. A couple deep breaths and get ready to run for the office. The light oasis. I flip the switch as I'm rushing to the office like a scared child. I see this chatter bastard right next to me. I don't know how it got so close. Usually it takes at least 30 seconds for it to stagger its way to the front of the shop. Maybe it hid in the shadows under a car while the lights were out. Who knows? All I know is it's about 2 feet from me. I bolt to the office and slam the door as it clamors behind me. Safe, I assume, under the fluorescent lights. I was hiding under the window that looked out into the shop, catching my breath, wondering if I've gone crazy, knowing I have to get up to leave, that I can't stay, that I should turn the lights off in the office before I do. But fuck that. The lights are staying on tonight. I slowly lift my head up to peek out the window to make sure the coast was clear. The coast was not clear. Just past where the light from the office fades into the darkness of the shop, I could see this jolting demon pacing back and forth like a tremoring tiger trapped in a cage, agonizing in its every movement. I watched for as long as I could bear. I ducked back down and fumbled with my keys, preparing to make a break for the door and to my car. My hands are sweaty and shaky. Without checking to see where this convulsing monstrosity is, I take my chance and run for the door. My escape is only a few steps away, but it seems like a mile. Between strides, the lights fail me again. Last few feet in total darkness, I fling the door wide and slide out as fast as I can. I pivot to slam it, and in the quick sliver before I do, I can see the rattler right up against the office window. The lights from the office making it hard to make out, but I swear it was there, watching as I left. As soon as the door is sealed, I slip my keys in and lock it up. I jump into my car and I'm out of there. I called in sick today. I don't think I have it in me to close up the shop again, but being the new guy, I know I'll have to. I don't want to lose this job either. I finally get to wrench on cars instead of being told how to fix them by a computer. So if anyone has any idea what the hell this Wiggle Man is, or how to get rid of it, please let me know. Any and all info will help. We lived in an older, established neighborhood with my husband and our son. We lived in the neighborhood for a couple of weeks and still have not met any of the neighbors. Once we were settled in, I planned on inviting the neighbors over for a housewarming party. Our neighborhood was always a beacon of activity, like biking and such. I often would watch the neighbors walk throughout the neighborhood or sit on their porches chatting with each other. I noticed no one came in or out of their home after 9:30 p.m. This seemed odd. We moved from the West Coast and people were out at all hours. I assumed the early hours were because the neighbors were retired and went to bed early, or because we now live in the South where time stands still. Either way, my street was like a ghost town after 9:30 p.m. My husband had recently bought us a dog, and I was excited at being a dog owner. I decided I would train Penelope myself. Pen was not used to other dogs and needed to be walked later in the evening. One night, after I finished washing the dinner dishes, I decided to take Pen for a walk. It must have been 9:25, 9:30, because the neighbors were going in. I waved, but didn't get a wave back. I guess they didn't see us. We walked down our side of the street, and I noticed every house had wind chimes. It was a gentle, breezy evening, but none of the chimes chimed. The air went still. The wind chimes began slowly chiming in unison. I thought, how interesting, the neighbors' wind chimes are on a synchronized timer. We passed a religious-themed wind chime, and I swore I heard someone say, "Go home." I shrugged it off. Wind chimes can't speak. It was someone's television. We passed a silver and gold wind chime. The "Go home" was louder. I looked around and the street was eerily quiet. Pen by this time was making a slow rearward retreat, and I was not too far behind. As I about faced, the wind chimes were chiming fast and loud, as if they were warning the person inside of an upcoming tornado. I was beyond spooked. We were 10 houses from ours, and all I could hear was "Go home, go home, go home." Pen froze in her tracks, as if she was staring at something and was turned into a statue. The "Go home" chimes were so loud I thought I was going to pass out. I I could feel the blood leave my face. I tried to move, but I lost all control of my body. I was struck by fear. The wind chiming was impossible to ignore as the go home continued. The small, conscious part of my brain was able to hear two of the greatest words in the human language. Run now. I picked up pen and began to run. 8 houses away, 7 houses away. Oh no, I lost my shoe. 6 houses away. Pen is so heavy. Go home. Go home. Chimes were loud. Does anyone else hear this? I screamed. 5 houses away. Go home. Go home. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I yelled. 4 houses. Silence. What the heck? Where are the chimes? The wind starts blowing again, and I am confused. I hear those 2 words again. Run now. This time, piercing through my ears and jarring my brain. 3 houses. I see my porch. 2 houses. Almost there. 1 house. I trip over the broken sidewalk. Down goes Pen, while I wipe out like a snowboarder, finally coming to a rest at the bottom of my steps. Pen is licking my face, and we run into the house. My husband sees I'm bloody and runs me a bath. He asks what happened, and I guess I'm still in shock, and I say I must have gotten tangled in Pen's leash. The next morning, I awake and notice a handprint on my right shoulder and a wind chime hanging outside my door. It sounds silly, but I've always been a self-proclaimed mountain man. I just love the outdoors with a passion. Something about being outdoors alone seems to just give me peace. Sometimes I can clear my head and talk with God. Sometimes just think out certain problems. Right now, I'm staring at the woods I played in as a boy. Several dogs I've had are buried amongst the pines. Me and my dad shot my first buck past a small river there. I remember him teaching me how to clean the deer. These are the same woods where me and girlfriends that have come and gone would hike and find a tree to make out by after I carved our names in it with my pocket knife my great-grandpa had left me. Now, I'm enjoying morning coffee while my wife and daughter are asleep. It will probably be another hour or so before they get up. Her little dog named Banjo is curled up on my lap. Seeing the sun slowly rising through the Carolina trees is somewhat spiritual. It's funny that I named my daughter Carolina, I guess. She's starting to enjoy the woods too. She likes splashing in the river. She loves collecting pine cones for her little art projects. And last night, she asked me about something sinister. Going camping. I used to love camping, I really did. Roasting s'mores, trout fishing, waking up in a sleeping bag while it's cold out. Little rocks under the tent digging in your back. I can't bring myself to anymore though. I remember that night like it just happened. When Shannon told me we were having a baby, my friends decided we would celebrate with a man's camping trip. My wife understands the importance of me having guy time, so she was of course fine with it. I packed up my gear in my Jeep and was ready to embark the Blue Ridge Mountains. Me and the guys set up camp, and Troy snickered and told me he brought some Jack Daniel's whiskey for when it gets dark. Park rangers usually don't come around late, and other camping families wouldn't see us. The camping area prohibited alcohol. I put a dip of Skull Cherry in and started laughing myself. Thankfully, none of us are sloppy drunks, so a good buzz wouldn't hurt. We all wait around while David finished up the burgers. He brought some pickled onions to throw on too, and we truly ate like kings. It's been a while since we all got to do stuff like this. Me, Troy, David, and Jesse have been buds since elementary school. Tomorrow morning we ought to go catch some trout, I said. I left some poles in the Cherokee, and we could use corn as bait. And they were all excited. We didn't have time to hike or anything else, sadly, since we all got there kind of late. We started a tiny fire and carried as much wood as we seen fit. David left some more in the back of his truck anyways. He blurted out, "Congrats to James for finally losing his virginity." Followed by that was the other guys laughing. "You don't remember that time I had with your mom?" "Ah, screw you." We were all laughing like little schoolgirls. We started talking about our favorite jokes and roasting each other along with the marshmallows. I asked the dumb question, "Does anyone know any good scary stories?" Jay answered, "Ever hear about Wendigo?" They used to be Indians who resorted to eating each other. Troy asked, "Ever hear of John and the Three Devils?" David smiled. "I got a good story. My grandpappy told me about it. There was a park ranger around this area, Ranger Dan. Rumor has it, he went and patrolled an area and was seduced by a witch. The witch did something to him. Coworkers said he would started acting strange. Then he just disappeared. Legend has, he goes to a different campsite at night to terrorize campers. The only way you have a snowball of chance in hell of living is to put salt around your camp area." "James, what are you doing, you dingus?" I took no time. I spread around that salt like no tomorrow. I circled every inch of it easily. Better safe than sorry is my thought. The night rolled on and we enjoyed each other's company and breathed in mountain air as embers danced and glowed. Then, a ranger patrol truck pulled up. "Shit, hide the whiskey," Troy said as David hid it behind some wood. It was no use. We were all 5 sheets. "Gentlemen, may I see your camping slip?" The man was smiling, baby-faced, dark-haired, and just seemed odd. "Yes, sir." I clumsily went digging in my bag for it. "Do I smell liquor?" "Fuck." "Yes, sir, we used it for, cooking," Jay tried to explain. "Well, I'm gonna have to dispose of the rest of it. Listen, I get it. Bunch of men wanting to enjoy a buzz. Let me just come grab it." Fair enough, I guess. All of a sudden, he stopped in front of the salt circle. He stared at it with his hands on his hips. "Would one of you mind brushing this salt aside? I have a terrible allergy to it." Troy was stumbling to the salt to kick it aside until I jerked him back. "Listen, gentlemen. You can be in a lot more trouble for this shit, and I'll call backup." Troy slurring, Please don't." David asked the question. "What's your name, Officer, Dan?" We will deal with the backup and all that in the morning. Thanks for the concern." "Are you kidding me? Boys, you better break this circle before I lose my patience." "We won't, sir." "Very well." He walked off. My mouth was dry. I could feel my stomach pounding. Things were getting odd. I watched as he crept towards the only other campers, which were 2 teens already in their tent. I screamed, "Put salt around your tent!" It was too late. We heard screams that were full of agony and pain. We all scurried in our tent. Troy was chugging as much whiskey as his belly could hold. "If I'm asleep, I'll make it through this." I wish he would have made it outside that tent before he spewed Lynchburg's finest. Ranger Dan dragged the naked teens' corpses towards our area and tossed it on the fire. The smell of his burning body made me start puking as well as everyone else. "Step out of the circle," he demanded as he took the girls' guts and threw them at our tent. Our fire was dying and we were getting cold. The smell was unbearable and he wouldn't let up. The inside of our tent smelled bad too, but I still crawled in though. We all cuddled up to each other for warmth. 4 drunk outdoorsmen, scared for our life. "It's okay, boys. I can wait. Anytime you go camp, I'll be there too." Jess pulled out some medicine out of his bag. "Guys, we aren't supposed to mix this with alcohol, but this syrup will help us sleep. I have trouble sleeping anyway." We all jerked the bottle out of each other's hands while we tried to chug the grape-flavored syrup. "Sleep tight, boys." That's the last thing I heard Ranger Dan say, as I hear it every night in my dreams too. We woke up and police surrounded the area. The corpse was crisped over the embers we made. Our tent was covered in guts. And the inside, where some of the guys had pissed themselves and puked. An old ranger decided to question us, and he about dropped to his knees when I told him about Ranger Dan. "Boys, I worked with him. One day I caught him patrolling naked and he jumped off a cliff when I confronted him. The autopsy said he was dead at least. I haven't seen him since. I've heard the rumors though. The police reports made it seem like it was a bear attack. But no bear would ever leave a body over an open fire and sling guts on a tent. Life's been hard since that. David is in AA. Troy moved to the city. Jay overdosed last month. And here I am. My wife doesn't know about all the salt I keep in my Jeep. Every morning, while they're asleep, I circle it far around my property. "Frankie, I'm scared," Elizabeth called out from the bed on her side of our shared bedroom. I groaned while shifting under the blankets, irritated that my sister had interrupted my sleep yet again due to her irrational fear of the dark. I glanced over at the yellowed analog clock hanging on the wall, illuminated by dim moonlight shining through the window that read 1:13 a.m. "Yeah, and what do you want me to do about it? It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Go back to bed and leave me alone." Now don't take me the wrong way. Although it may seem like I was just an asshole that wanted to shut a frightened child up in order to go back to sleep, that wasn't the case. In fact, I wouldn't have minded easing her late night anxiety. Occasionally. That's what big brothers are for, isn't it? However, Elizabeth's foolish terror had become an ongoing, annoying problem, leading to unsettled nights like these too often. "Why won't you hold me like Mom used to do? I won't make a sound, I swear. I just want to feel safe." I laid on my back and rolled my eyes. Didn't she know I had an early shift in the morning? Plus, my bed was barely large enough for me, let alone another person. "Elizabeth, you're 10 years old. Act your age for once in your life." She turned to face me. Even through the inky black darkness, I could still see her big blue eyes sparkling with pure innocence. "Please, Frankie, I need you." She lowered the patchwork quilt, revealing a look of sheer horror and desperation to calm her troubled mind. Streaks of tears glistened on her cheeks as they slid past quivering lips. I'm sorry, but even the most unsympathetic person in the world couldn't say no to that face. "Fine, but you gotta promise you won't keep me up. No ifs, ands, or buts about it." Elizabeth sprung out of bed and scurried across the floor, practically tripping over her own feet. She was always quite clumsy. "Oh, I promise, Frankie, I pinky promise. I'll go straight to sleep." Scooting to the edge of my twin-sized mattress, I made just enough room for her tiny frame to squeeze between me and the bedroom wall. As she climbed into the cozy space I created, I noticed how unkind the Mississippi sticky summer had been to her curly auburn hair. Stray strands stuck out from the sloppy ponytail that appeared to beg for a comb, a look I often associated with our mother. Elizabeth looked more and more like her every day. I threw my arm across her shoulder, listening to her rapid heartbeat that felt as if it was going 100 miles a minute. But what are you so terrified of anyways? Repositioning herself to face me, she peered seriously into my eyes, keeping my full attention. Well, I'm scared of monsters. You know, the mean, ugly ones that hide under your bed and stuff. Of course she was afraid of imaginary beings lurking in the shadows. What kid isn't? However, she should have been old enough to know that believing in such creatures was delusional. At least, I had accepted that by that age. That Freddy guy scares me a lot. I have nightmares about him. It was then that I realized I shouldn't have let Elizabeth see Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, with her school friends. I didn't find out until much later in life that movies like this generally traumatize children. Oh well, you live and you learn, right? Despite that, I found it illogical to be uneasy over a horror movie character. Freddy Krueger only existed on the silver screen. I also have bad dreams about Daddy coming back. He scares me way more than Freddy. It's true, our father was nothing shy of a cold-hearted, drunken deadbeat bastard who liked to beat our mother black and blue just because he could. I'll never forget the day he forced Elizabeth and I to hold a revolver against Mom's forehead, with one bullet loaded into the chamber. This was his twisted version of Russian roulette. Each time one of us refused to pull the trigger, he would crack us across the back with a large, decorative Confederate belt buckle on his belt. Luckily, our father drunkenly passed out before the gun fired. Otherwise, Mom would have met her maker at the hands of her children. I'm certain this memory was permanently burned into Elizabeth's brain, considering, like myself, she had everlasting scars littering her back. Yet being terrified by the chance our father would return was pretty ridiculous. He'd ran off with a hussy many years before, and we hadn't seen him since. That pitiful excuse for a man couldn't even be bothered to show up to visitation hearings, let alone to come back to be with us. Death is very scary. Oh, and cancer, but I think I'm mostly scared of dying. Our mother, bless her soul, had lost the agonizing battle with a rare form of breast cancer 6 months prior. At the young age of 10 and 15, Elizabeth and I stayed by her side until what was left of her life slipped away. Mother was our everything, the kindest, most hardworking, loving human I'd ever met. Watching her go from an optimistic superwoman to a corpse 6 feet under was absolutely heartbreaking. Still worrying over cancer and death was absurd. Elizabeth hadn't even reached her teenage years. She had her whole life ahead of her. I'm scared of moving again. What if our foster parents aren't nice? She had a point. With our maternal grandparents at retiring age, having never met our father's parents, Elizabeth and I were thrown into foster care, and just a short few months residing in the system. We had encountered many abusive foster families. Even though our current family rationed food and basically treated us as servants to the biological children, they were the nicest foster parents we were placed with. In spite of that, fearing the inevitable of being dropped off in a new stranger's home was silly. We both knew it was guaranteed. Elizabeth just hadn't accepted it. Frankie, I'm scared of you too. Suddenly, I snapped back to reality. The buzzing fluorescent light hanging above bounced off the silver metal cable I was handcuffed to. An officer with gray hair, proving experience, sat in front of me. The frown plastered on his lips suggested he was not at all happy with my presence. Franklin, we understand the incident occurred 19 years ago, so it may be hard for you to remember. However, DNA testing advancements have linked you to the scene of the crime. So unless you start explaining, we have no reason to believe that you are not our perpetrator. He slid a Polaroid towards my direction, but I turned my head in disgust. The image of Elizabeth's butchered little body was far too gruesome to bear. I couldn't handle another flashback to that horrible time. You have to realize, it wasn't my intention to hurt my sweet little sister. That wasn't my plan at all. I was just trying to protect her from the world she was frightened by. Poor girl was living in a constant state of anxiety, and I wanted to fix it. Every one of her phobias were so stupid that just waking up in the morning was like hell for her. Well, I take that back. Being scared of me was the only logical fear Elizabeth possessed. After all, I did kill her. I hope everyone enjoyed our video tonight. It was a nice, long, no sleep video. And I wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone. I am almost to 1,000 subscribers, and I am completely blown away. So, to each and every one of you, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my narrations, and I hope you continue to enjoy them. Have a wonderful night.